Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are just starting to let everybody in. So if you are here, if you could just drop your name in the chat, let us know where you're from. We just would love to know who our audience is tonight, who's joining us, where you're from. If you could let us know what your occupation is. If you're a student athlete, a coach, a dietitian, athletic trainer, and if you're a student athlete or a coach, if you could let us know what sport you are playing, that would be great. Getting to know the audience a little bit before we start really helps. So we have Kim as a dietitian, Gabby from Venezuela, but living in the United States. Welcome, everyone. Danielle from Chicago, dietitian and a marathon runner herself, which is awesome. Amanda from Los Angeles. Great. We have people from Florida. Hello, Jenna. All right, everyone's going in really fast now. But Jen from New Jersey, an athletic trainer. Hello, thanks for coming tonight. Looks like there's a little poll there. If you have a second to put your answer, your profession in there, that would be great too. I am just gonna talk here for a couple minutes as people start to come on. It looks like we've got a couple folks from Michigan. Welcome, strength and conditioning, athletic trainer. Great. So just as we let everyone get in, it's a little after 8, so we'll give just another minute. Hello out to Skylar from Idaho. We will wait while we're waiting for everyone to get in. I just want to let you know, I am really excited for everyone to join this tonight. And I'm really excited to be talking about this topic this evening, fueling in the menstrual cycle. This is definitely something we seem to normally shy away from. So I think more because sometimes it's difficult to discuss and as practitioners and athletes, and we need to normalize this conversation. And I'm hoping that this is kind of that first step to be able to talk about this with the athletes, maybe as a athlete yourself, it's something to talk about with your performance team. But we want to normalize this conversation around fueling the menstrual cycle to really help athletes reach their potential. So just so you know, tonight, I will have the chat up, but sometimes it gets really busy. So if you have questions, we'd really like you to put them in the Q&A rather than the chat, just because there's so much going on in the chat. It's really hard to see. I may wait until the end to answer a bunch of questions. But the presentation itself is going to just be scratching the surface of female athlete nutrition, or really that menstrual cycle. This is such a huge topic, but we thought that we would throw out some information, give some general information, and provide an overview. So welcome, everyone. I see we've got folks from Canada, Quebec, Mexico City, and again, a lot from Chicago, so welcome. All right, I am actually going to kind of minimize that chat, and we are going to start. Maybe if I can get the slides to go. So just a little bit about me. I'm a board certified specialist in sports dietetics. I used to work at the Naval Academy for about 11 years. So I have coached a lot of Division I athletes and club programs. Also those that are going on to be tactical athletes. I have co-authored a book. I was a consultant for the Gatorade Sports Science Institute and the NBA G League. And prior to all that, I was an athlete and a coach myself. So what we are going to learn tonight, we are going to learn the hormonal phases of the menstrual cycle, the effect of hormone levels on fueling for training and competition, and the nutrition needs of the female athlete. Again, these are some very basic things, but good reminders and places to build the base. If you're a practitioner, this is good information to start relaying to your athletes. If you are an athlete, this is great information for you to understand, to be able to get to where you need to be. So the menstrual cycle. starts on the first day of a period and ends when the next period begins. The period occurs when an egg is not fertilized by the end of that cycle. And during that period, we release the endometrial tissue and the blood that would have been used for pregnancy. So the menstrual cycle, the average age of a first period is between 9 and 15 years old. Some get it younger and some don't actually get it by 15. So if you have any athletes that you're working with that have not gotten their period by 15, you really need to push them to talk to their physician, their pediatrician about that. Periods can vary so much. They can last between 2 and 7 days. The average cycle is 28, but that again can range from 24 to 38 days. So I think we can see by just this slide, looking at these age ranges and days lasting and cycle length, that we can tell right away that no matter what you're doing or what type of athlete that you're working with, you can't just generalize that this is what it is, this is their period, this is how long it's going to be, and this is how long it's going to last. We know that each athlete is going to be different, and right there we can really tell just by looking at that, just the variation. So we really need to pay attention to each athlete when we're talking about the menstrual cycle. So the importance of the menstrual cycle, and again, really important to explain to our athletes. If you're going in to talk with a team, if you're going just one-on-one to talk with someone, if you're talking to another practitioner, we really want to emphasize to these athletes that the importance of the menstrual cycle. So it signals your body is working normally. Despite them maybe not wanting to have a period, it really is a good sign that your body is in that hormonal balance. And again, all of that is going to help increase bone density rather than decrease bone density. So the menstrual cycle, the two main hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and the two main phases, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this chart, but you can see the hormones as they peak, and which when we talk about in the next slide, and I'll go back and forth a little bit, the follicular phase, the hormones are the lowest. You can see that. Oftentimes, that's when female athletes feel good. I guess some think they feel it's kind of the feel awesome phase, but that's when they feel good. So the hormones are the lowest. The luteal phase, again, we'll kind of go back. You can see the hormones are high. So those are the last half of that cycle are usually when people or female athletes start to feel lousy. The hormones start to rise, the body temperature increases, ovulation occurs. So there's a lot of different things going on that may refer to as feeling lousy throughout that 2-week or maybe more period. So how do we fuel during this first phase, that follicular phase? And the goal is to focus on carbohydrates. So in this phase, the body may better support intense activity. So we may see an athlete doing more intense cardiovascular training, maybe more intense strength training, and maybe seeing some more gains. During that time, you're able to oxidize, or the female athlete's able to oxidize carbohydrate better. And so we really want to consume those carbohydrates, really focusing on that pre-exercise, during exercise as well, and replenishing those carbohydrate stores post-exercise. So quick carbs pre-exercise, any of these types of things, the fruits, the apples, applesauce, pretzels, fruit snacks, granola bars, cereal, those are all great pre-exercise snacks. Something that's quick in carbohydrates, something that's digest quickly about 30 to 60 minutes before. And then post-exercise, that's when we want the carbohydrates with a little bit of protein. It can be some more long-lasting carbohydrates. So those, oatmeal, some quinoa, yogurt with the carbohydrates and protein, milk, carbohydrates and protein, some of those more long-lasting carbohydrates. So training and fueling through the luteal phase. Again, that's when women also often refer to that part of their menstrual cycle is the part where they don't feel as good. During this time, you can see the resting energy expenditure increases 2.5 to 11%, which actually was more than I thought, which is actually very interesting. And now you can understand why athletes always say they may have these cravings, they may feel extra hungry, and they oftentimes are a little bit scared to act on them. But using this to say, hey, here we are, 2.5 to 11%, your resting energy expenditure goes up. You need to honor that hunger and you need to fuel. So again, that body's using more energy. We need to increase that fuel intake. So how do we do that without, sometimes us female athletes get really nervous about eating more? How do we do that? Just easy little ways, just increasing portion size. Maybe you increase the meal or snack frequency, just adding an extra snack, more nuts and seeds, kind of add extras, maybe a little bit of extra olive oil, maybe add a little bit of more peanut butter or nut butter to a sandwich, avocados, little things in there. And again, it doesn't need to be massive amounts of fuel. It doesn't need to be overwhelming to the athlete, but again, just getting a little bit more fuel. And I see there's a question, and there is going to be some references to give you a little bit more information about where this information is coming from. So training and fueling through the luteal phase. So as we talked about, there's an increased use of protein and fat as energy. So we need to increase the protein and fat intake. Increase in body temperature. So we really need to make sure that the athlete is focusing on hydration. We want to keep that core temperature low so they don't burn up all their carbohydrates, so they don't get dehydrated. So we want to keep that body temperature low. Also, increasing potential. Not all female athletes are going to experience the cramps and pain, but many will, and there's going to be varying levels of that. So we want to try to get some foods in the system or fuel in the system that will help. So magnesium, so trying to increase some foods with magnesium. Again, these are all really great foods anyway, but edamame, salmon, some tart cherry juice, almonds, pumpkin seeds, peanut butters, all really good fuel. And things that I also want you to think about as you're going through this training and fueling through this phase is to really, when you're working with an athlete, or if you are an athlete, really think about how you feel. Again, not all athletes are going to be able to fuel the same. Some may have cramps and pain that are so painful that telling them to eat, they don't want to eat, they don't want to train, they're in a lot of pain. So again, helping them find the best avenue to fuel through, all right, those particular things. And again, be realistic about training. So protein and fat, as most of you know, most of you are dietitians here, a lot of you on here, the chicken, salmon, tofu, lentils, chickpeas, all good sources of protein. And then adding more of the things that we talked about, the nuts, the nut butters, the seeds, the avocado, and the fatty fish. So just some general nutrition considerations for the female athlete. Everything that I've talked about so far doesn't really mean much, all right? If your athlete or you as the athlete are not getting enough calories to actually support training, all right? To support training and to support the menstrual cycle. So that's the first step. Working with an athlete, if this is something that you need to think about this first. Are they getting enough calories to support menstruation? If the answer is no, that's the first thing you need to work on. All right, how can we get them some more fuel? How can we get that menstrual cycle to be normal? Again, what we talked about, carbohydrates are going to be really important before, during, and after exercise, and emphasizing the carbohydrates in that follicular phase. Protein, we want to spread that throughout the day, 20 grams about every 4 hours, and emphasizing the protein in the luteal phase. Same thing for fat, emphasizing in the luteal phase and aiming for at least 20% of intake from fat. Again, just looking at the plate, and they're eating, making sure that about 20% of the foods that they're consuming are coming from fat. So before we go into this case studies, I do want to answer a question or send copies of the slides. Yeah, there's going to be a recording of the webinar that gets sent out, I think, probably one day later. So it should be there tomorrow. So a case study. And again, this you can actually, if you'd like to, you can put this in the Q&A if you have answers here. But a 20-year-old female college soccer player complained she's been feeling lousy during workouts and competition every month. During the last few weeks of her menstrual cycle, she's also been following a strict low-fat diet to help lose weight for her sport. So, a couple questions. What macronutrient does this athlete need to increase? And what is the recommendation during the luteal phase for this macronutrient? What education does this athlete need to help her reach her training and weight goals? And then provide an example how she could incorporate fat and protein during the luteal phase. Any ideas? I'm actually going to close out of the chat part and just pull up the Q&A part. So yeah, the macronutrient would be fat, at least 20%. Yep. Again, all of these numbers, all right, I'm a dietitian, doesn't focus on too much numbers, more about educating the athlete about what they're eating, looking at the plate, but knowing in my mind about what approximately what it looks like in my mind. And yes, 20% could be too low for some athletes, depending on sport, depending on goals, depending on if their menstrual cycle is normal or not. So all those things are true. So increase fat. So what are some of the education that we could do with this athlete to help her reach some of her training and weight goals? And how? So I think maybe you guys have kind of said that there, but we can teach them how and what to eat, the protein and the fat. And again, healthy fat sources. That's right, Danielle, healthy fat does not equate to weight gain, especially for female athletes. They may be hesitant to eat more fat. Eating fat does not make you fat. So that is something to relay. All right, let's go on to case study number 2 here. So a 17-year-old swimmer has been working with a sports dietitian to increase her energy intake. After many months, her period has consistently returned. So now that her cycle has normalized, what should she focus on? And then what are some simple things she can do leading up to and during her period to help improve performance? So on the swimmer, is that Kimberly talking about? Oops, sorry. Every time something happens here, the little Q&A keeps going back and forth. So her period, her cycle has normalized, which is great. And now we need to focus on that balanced diet, the fat, adequate calories. Yep. Having fat sources at her meals, and what are some simple things that she can do leading up to her period is really understanding the phases, what she should have during the different phases of her cycle, and also being very aware of honoring her hunger. All right, I think with female athletes, a lot of times they don't like to honor that hunger. And when they feel really hungry, they get a little bit nervous about eating more. And we have to normalize that and explain to them what is actually happening with their bodies and why they may be craving certain things, why they want more fuel, why they need more fuel, and how that can really help improve performance overall. Here are some references. And again, this is going to be sent to you, so you will be able to see those, you'll be able to get these references. And a lot of those pictures came from these references, so you'll be able to see that. Oops. Now, again, we just scratched the surface of fueling for the menstrual cycle. There's so much information out there, but unfortunately, as female athletes know, or maybe the practitioners that work with female athletes know, that there's just so much more to understand and to dive into with female athletes. Just unfortunately, a lot of the research is done on male athletes. Doing research on female athletes is a little bit more complicated, but hopefully we can all push for that to get more information to help our female athletes, strive and reach the optimal performance that they can. My sports dietitian has some helpful sports nutrition ebooks that can be, you can scan this QR code and see some options that may help you dive into this a little bit further. I'm just going to check quickly. I don't see any more questions there. I also have, I told you I co-authored a book, which is also available with Jones and Bartlett publishers, Amazon and Barnes and Noble, to help provide more on the female athlete and sports nutrition and exercise. And do we have any other questions here as I'm going through this? Please just type them into the Q&A, please, not the chat. And while I'm waiting for you to throw in some more questions, I just wanted to let you know about the new offerings from my sports dietitian. It's going to be, I'm going to push this to the next one. Coming on October 10th, my sports dietitian is going to be launching a new program. It's a new one-on-one sports nutrition coaching plan called My Nutrition Plan. The first 2 weeks are free. It looks like there's an early bird discount for the first 100 subscribers, and all that is starting on October 10th. There's a QR code here as well if you're interested in that, and I will leave that on the screen for a little bit. Don't be shy. It looks like if for some reason I was not able to answer your question or I missed it, please type it again. But I see here from Emily, do you have your female athletes track their cycle? If so, do you have them use an app? That's a great question, Emily. It really depends on so many different things. It really depends on the athlete, and if I know I'm going to be able to get them to do it. Some are better than others. I actually, I'm not sure if you guys heard this, but the new Apple Watch actually tracks fertility, which basically means it's going to track your menstrual cycle, which is awesome. So I think that will actually probably turn into a really good feature for athletes that are having problems, or for athletes that really want to kind of zone in, obviously, on feeling around their menstrual cycle. But I do think every athlete should track for a little bit their menstrual cycle to understand how many days is your cycle. When are the days that you're normally feeling great? What are the days that you're feeling not so great? And really kind of, that's just another piece of the puzzle for them to understand, okay, this is normal. I don't feel that great right now. Well, this is normal. This usually happens to me every month. Or, wow, I'm noticing that my cycle lasts 36, 37 days. Is this okay? Or I'm noticing that it lasts less than 20 days. What's going on? So I really think it helps them know that if something starts to change, because I think with anyone, with ourselves, with athletes, we need to realize that just because something is happening right then, or it's happening regularly for a few months, doesn't mean at any time that it can't change, especially when they're going in and out of in season versus, off season training. So really important, I think, to have them track their cycle, just get a general idea. And actually it can be it's really not that complicated. They don't have to get too crazy about it. If they want to get more precise about it, I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I think you have to judge that athlete and see how much you're going to be able to push them and see how much education you're going to be able to give them without them kind of turning away on you. So that's a great question. I think for an athlete who obviously doesn't have a regular period, that would be really, really important. So what's the most common problem for the athletes that do not get their period? Meaning, why do they not get their period? I mean, most athletes are not getting their period because they're not eating enough, they're not fueling enough, they're not getting enough calories. And what are the most common problems? I would say you can, over time, you'll see poor performance, you'll see bone density decrease. I've worked with a lot of athletes that will realize that there's an issue with their period, their menstrual cycle, after they've come in multiple times with stress fractures. So that's always a big sign that something's not right. Any advice for perimenopausal athletes? I think we're just going to focus for this particular webinar on mostly the high school, the collegiate, maybe some of the younger athletes, but perimenopausal athletes, again, it's the same thing, just really tracking that cycle to figure out when things are changing. You know, again, as you move throughout different stages, you may notice that your period changes in the sense of how heavy it is, the amount of cramping. So a lot of those things you should be tracking and discussing with your doctor. So there's a question about strength athlete females on birth control, be more affected from their period. So I didn't want to discuss I'm not going to discuss birth control today, just because that's a whole nother, that's a big question with a lot more to talk about, just because birth control, there's just so many different types of birth control, or I shouldn't say so many different types, but a few different types. So it really depends on the birth control, what exactly they're getting for hormones on that birth control. And so that is something that really needs to be discussed more with, again, pediatrician, OBGYN, maybe the sports med doc, to make sure, to make sure that's the right thing. And also to really understand when you go on one of those particular birth controls that you know what actual hormones you are taking, or maybe you can look at and decide which ones you want to take based on what hormones each one have in them. Oops, I'm trying to scroll down. Sorry, Emily has, if you rule out the nutrient, calorie deficiency, changes in stress, sleep, travel, etc., would you ever recommend? I, again, am not going to recommend any type of, I don't recommend birth control. I don't recommend a supplement for regulating their period. Again, I think this is where this team approach, especially with female athletes related to menstrual cycle, you really need to look at that team approach. That's my background. I really like to work with sports med. I like to work with, it could be psychologists, sports psychologist, eating disorder psychologist. It really kind of depends on where that athlete stands. But I think, it could be an endocrinologist that you're working with. There's a lot of different people on that team to kind of pull together to make sure that we're not missing something along the way. I've had plenty of athletes with either not getting their period or having really heavy periods. Maybe there's an issue with PCOS. Again, some of these things are hard to diagnose. So I never like to say, okay, there's a reason why they're not getting their period. Let's figure it out and then figure out what is the best action plan. And again, I like working with a team to do that. And any athlete that comes to me with multiple stress fractures usually ends up, we kind of go backwards a little bit that's a stress factor. But then we go back in history and we try to figure out, how did this happen? Where did this come from? What are we doing? And normally, most of that stress fracture is related to the fact that they're just not feeling right, meaning they're not feeling enough. And then we have to kind of keep digging into why that is. Some of these things, I will say most that come in, they're in a sense, you see it, most of them are going to be, they're going to be malnourished, or they're going to be not be, I shouldn't say necessarily malnourished, but they're not going to be eating enough. They're going to have this real calorie deficiency, or maybe they've ramped up training a lot and they haven't ramped up their nutrition. Maybe they're in a place where they felt like they're supposed to be losing weight. So there's that. We always want to look at the red S and see if what's happening there, do some education on that with the athlete. So there's a lot of different options and a lot of different ways that these things can go. It's just not black and white. Like if this happens, then this happens. That's not really it. There's so many different things. When an athlete comes in, I think the most fun thing about working with an athlete, it's kind of like it's a trivia. It's a problem. It's something, it's a case we have to solve. And there's not always an easy answer. But as you start to work with more and more, you'll start to notice there's usually an underlying theme. And then you can start to kind of develop your own way and tactics of working with those athletes. All right. I think we've answered most of these questions. Oops. Let's see. A 3 to 10% increase in resting metabolism equates to 160 calories at most if RMR is 1600. It's not a huge increase in food intake. No, it doesn't need to be a huge increase, just a little bit. So if you're thinking about, that your resting energy expenditure goes up by doing nothing by maybe 100 to 200 calories, but over a few weeks, you're not increasing your fuel intake, then you're 200 calories deficient every day for 2 weeks. And that kind of adds up. And to me, I look at it as like a cup, the cup is full and we're just keep taking a little bit out, but we're not putting anything back in. So again, I'm not a dietitian, that I don't work with my athletes in calories. I really try to explain to them, hey, you need to focus on hunger and fueling and honoring that hunger. So, I think that's a very good thing to just kind of, again, explain to them that maybe one day you're not honoring the hunger, but you do this over time and then you're just in debt. And that's what we really want to make sure is that we don't get into that nutrition debt where it's really hard to dig yourself out. So that's a good question. And I think when we tell athletes, hey, you need to eat a little bit more, being realistic with them and saying, it's not that much more. It's just a little bit. That's why when I was talking about going back to this, going back to this ways to increase fuel intake, increasing your portion size just a little bit, all right? Increasing, a little bit in a meal, or maybe adding an extra snack, or just adding a little bit of extras, just a little bit can go a long way to making that, that lousy phase, so to speak, more, you feel more satisfied, and then again, see that better performance. All right, I'm going to give it one more minute, see if there are any other questions. And I really appreciate everyone attending this evening from all over. And again, like I said, I think tomorrow the slides will be out. Or you'll get an email. It's either tomorrow or the next day. It comes pretty quickly, and you can listen to it on recording. I appreciate it, everyone, for coming tonight. Again, if you have any questions, you can always email my sports dietitian. If there's something that maybe you thought of, you can email me and my sports dietitian. All the information is on the website. And thank you. Have a good night. Thanks.